Almohadilla single dad was fired and walking home, until two helicopters landed shouting "Where's the doctor?" The deafening whir of helicopter blades slashed through the air as Dr. James Mitchell shielded his eyes against the swirling dust. Two military-grade choppers had just landed on the empty stretch of highway before him, their rotors still spinning urgently. A uniformed man leapt out, megaphone in hand. "Where's the doctor?" he shouted over the roar. James stood frozen, his termination letter still crumpled in his pocket, wondering how his worst day had suddenly become the most important one of his life. If you're wondering how a single father who just lost his job ended up saving hundreds of lives that day, stay with me. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more incredible true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. 3 hours earlier, Dr. James Mitchell had sat across from hospital administrator Diane Keller, his hands folded tightly in his lap to hide their trembling. "I'm sorry, James. The board's decision is final," Diane said, sliding the termination papers across her polished desk. "Budget cuts have forced our hand. Your position has been eliminated." James stared at the document, the words swimming before his eyes. "I've been here for 12 years, Diane." 12 years. "Your clinical work has always been exemplary," she replied, her voice professionally detached. "But the new hospital management is restructuring. They're bringing in their own team. I have a daughter to support," James said quietly. "Emma's only 8. Her mother." It trailed off, the familiar ache of his wife's absence 3 years after her death still raw. Diane's expression softened momentarily. "He fought for you, James. He really did. Bad corporate healthcare is." She sighed. "Well, you know what it's become." James nodded numbly, gathering the papers. His mind raced to their small apartment, to the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, to Emma's upcoming school expenses. His savings would carry them for a few months, but after that. "Your severance package is outlined on page 3, Diane continued. "And of course, I'll be your reference." "Thank you," James replied automatically, though gratitude was the furthest thing from what he felt. As he walked through the hospital corridors for what would be the last time, James avoided eye contact with nurses and colleagues who had no idea this was his final day. He couldn't bear their questions or, worse, their pity. In the locker room, he emptied his belongings into a cardboard box, family photos, medical journals, the coffee mug Emma had painted for him last Father's Day. His car, an aging sedan that had been making ominous noises for weeks, chose this day to finally give up. It sputtered and died just as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot. The mechanic he called delivered the final blow, the transmission was shot. The repair would cost more than the car was worth. "Just perfect," James muttered, retrieving his box of belongings from the trunk. They have to walk the 5 miles home. At least the weather was decent, early autumn, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of distant rain. As he trudged along the highway shoulder, cars whizzing past, James tried to formulate a plan. He'd update his resume tonight, start applying to other hospitals in the morning. Maybe he could pick up some urgent care shifts in the meantime. The medical staffing agencies always needed doctors, even if the pay was lower and the hours unpredictable. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patel, their elderly neighbor who watched Emma after school. "Emma is asking when you'll be home. Everything okay?" James typed back quickly, "Car trouble. Walking home. Be there soon. Thank you." He couldn't tell Mrs. Patel about losing his job. Not yet. Not until he had figured out what to say to Emma. How do you tell an 8-year-old that the stability she'd finally regained after losing her mother was once again in jeopardy? Lost in these thoughts, James barely registered the distant thumping sound that gradually grew louder. It wasn't until the wind began to whip violently around him that he looked up to see 2 military helicopters descending onto the empty stretch of highway ahead. Traffic had stopped in both directions. Drivers were getting out of their cars, pointing and staring as the choppers touched down. James shielded his face from the dust and debris, his box of belongings clutched tightly against his chest. A man in military fatigues jumped from the first helicopter, megaphone in hand. "We need a doctor." "Is there a doctor here?" James hesitated. After the day he'd had, the last thing he wanted was more complications. But 12 years of medical training and the Hippocratic Oath weren't so easily dismissed. He stepped forward. "I'm a doctor. Emergency medicine." The military man rushed toward him. "Dr. Mitchell?" "James Mitchell." James froze. "How do you know my name?" "No time to explain, sir." There has been a major accident at a chemical plant 30 miles north. Multiple casualties, hazardous materials involved. The nearest trauma center is overwhelmed. We've been authorized to recruit additional medical personnel. But I just got fired, James said, the words sounding absurd even to his own ears. The man looked confused for only a moment. Sir, with all due respect, that doesn't matter right now. People are dying. We need your expertise. James thought of Emma waiting at home, of the promises he'd made to always be there for her after her mother died. My daughter. We'll make arrangements. Please, Dr. Mitchell. Time is critical. James took a deep breath. I need to make a call first. The officer nodded, and James quickly dialed Mrs. Patel's number, explaining as calmly as possible that there was an emergency and he needed to help. Could she keep Emma overnight? Mrs. Patel, bless her, agreed immediately. Let me talk to Emma, James said. His daughter's small voice came through the phone. Daddy? Where are you? Hey, sweetheart. Listen, there are some people who need my help right now. So many people who are hurt. Mrs. Patel is going to take care of you tonight, okay? Like when mommy was sick and you had to stay at the hospital. James swallowed hard. Something like that. I'll be home as soon as I can. I promise. Okay, Daddy. Help them get better. I love you, Em. Love you too. James handed his box of belongings to a bewildered driver who had stopped to watch the scene unfold, asking if he could leave it at the hospital's front desk. Then he climbed aboard the helicopter, his mind already shifting into emergency mode, cataloging protocols for chemical burns, respiratory distress, traumatic injuries. As the helicopter lifted off, James caught a glimpse of the highway below, of his broken-down car growing smaller in the distance. The day that had started with him losing everything had suddenly given him purpose again, even if just for a few hours. The flight to the disaster site took less than 15 minutes. From the air, James could see the chemical plant, or what remained of it. One section had collapsed entirely, and thick, dark smoke billowed from multiple points. Emergency vehicles surrounded the perimeter, their lights flashing urgently against the gathering dusk. What happened? James shouted over the roar of the rotors. Explosion in the main processing unit, the officer replied. Initial reports suggest equipment failure. Over 100 workers were on site, plus a tour group of high school students. Hamid's stomach tightened. Children. There were children involved. The helicopter landed in a cleared area where a makeshift field hospital had been established. Medical personnel in hazmat suits moved between rows of the injured. The scene was chaotic but organized, the kind of controlled emergency response that James had trained for but rarely encountered outside of disaster drills. A woman in a colonel's uniform approached as James disembarked. Dr. Mitchell? Colonel Lisa Reeves, National Guard Medical Corps. Thank you for coming. What do you need me to do? James asked, already scanning the triage area. We're short on physicians with trauma experience. Most of the local doctors are at the hospital handling the critical cases that were transported first. We need you to assess and stabilize patients here before evacuation. A nurse appeared with a hazmat suit, and James quickly donned it. As he worked to secure the mask, Colonel Reeves continued her briefing. We've set up 3 zones. Red for critical, yellow for serious but stable, green for walking wounded. The chemical involved is primarily an industrial solvent. Respiratory issues are our biggest concern, followed by chemical burns and traumatic injuries from the blast. James nodded. I'll start in the red zone. For the next several hours, James moved from patient to patient, making rapid assessments and interventions. He intubated a middle-aged man whose airway was closing from chemical exposure. He stabilized a compound fracture in a young woman's leg. It performed emergency chest decompressions on a security guard who had been closest to the blast. So many patients he lost. A plant supervisor with burns over 80% of his body. An elderly maintenance worker whose heart gave out despite CPR. Death weighed on him, but there was no time to process the grief. Not when others still needed help. It was while treating a teenage girl with chemical burns on her hands and face that James learned more about what had happened. She was part of the high school tour group, advanced chemistry students visiting the plant to learn about industrial applications. Mr. Delaney pushed us toward the exit when the alarms went off, she said, wincing as James carefully cleaned her burns. But then there was this huge boom, and everything started falling. Is he okay? Our teacher. James didn't know, but he promised to find out. Later, he learned that Thomas Delaney, the chemistry teacher, had gone back into the building after evacuating his students, trying to help trapped workers. It was currently in surgery at the regional hospital. As midnight approached, the flow of patients finally began to slow. The most critical had been transported to hospitals, and the remaining injured were stable. James sat heavily on an empty supply crate, removing his hazmat helmet and wiping sweat from his face. Kenil Reeves found him there, offering a bottle of water. "You've done remarkable work tonight, Dr. Mitchell. I've had 3 different nurses tell me they want to kidnap you for their regular ER shifts." James managed a tired smile. "Might be available sooner than they think. He got laid off today." The colonel's eyebrows rose. "Today? And then you came here?" "Didn't have much choice. Your guys are pretty persuasive with those helicopters." She laughed, then grew serious. "The hospital let you go?" "Which one?" "Mercy General. Both hit cuts, apparently." Kenil Reeves shook her head. "Their loss. Listen, when this is all over, I'd like to talk to you about some opportunities with our medical response team. We need physicians who can perform under pressure like you've done tonight." James was about to respond when a commotion near the yellow zone caught their attention. A teenage boy was having a seizure, his body rigid and jerking on the stretcher. "Status epilepticus," James said, already moving. "How long has he been seizing?" "Just started," a nurse replied. "He was stable, just some minor burns and a concussion." James quickly assessed the situation. "This isn't from trauma. It's chemical exposure. We need lorazepam and phenytoin, now." As they worked to stabilize the boy, James noticed similar symptoms developing in 2 other patients nearby, a plant worker and another student. His mind raced through the possibilities. "Kenil," he called out, "I think we're dealing with a delayed neurotoxic effect from the chemical exposure." These patients were all in the same area of the plant. Kenil Reeves immediately grasped the implications. "We need to screen everyone who was in that section. And alert the hospitals about patients already transported." The next 2 hours were a blur as they identified and treated additional cases of neurotoxicity. Hamid's quick diagnosis potentially saved dozens of lives, as hospitals were able to begin preventative treatment before patients developed severe symptoms. By dawn, the crisis had finally stabilized. The field hospital was being dismantled, with remaining patients transferred to regular medical facilities. James stood watching the sunrise, exhaustion bone deep but mind still alert from adrenaline. Colonel Reeves approached, accompanied by a man in a business suit. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Richard Hargrove, CEO of Eastern Chemical Corporation." The CEO extended his hand. "Dr. Mitchell, I can't thank you enough for what you've done here. Your identification of the neurotoxic effect saved many of my employees." James shook his hand automatically. "Just doing my job." "I understand you're between positions at the moment," Hargrove continued. "Eastern Chemical has a medical director opening at our corporate headquarters. After seeing your work tonight, I'd like to offer you the position." James blinked in surprise. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hargrove, but I'm a clinical physician. I belong in a hospital, treating patients. The role includes oversight of our 7 on-site clinics, Dr. Mitchell. You'd still be practicing medicine, just with better hours and, frankly, better compensation than most hospitals offer." "Better hours." The words resonated with James as he thought of Emma, of all the evenings he'd missed because of late shifts, of the weekends spent catching up on sleep rather than spending time with his daughter. "I'd like to learn more," he said cautiously. "Excellent. My office will contact you to set up a formal interview, but consider this a standing offer." As Hargrove walked away, Colonel Reeves smiled. "Looks like getting fired might have been the best thing to happen to you, Doctor." "Maybe," James agreed, though his thoughts were already turning homeward. "Is there any chance I could get a ride back? I have an 8-year-old who's probably worried sick." "One helicopter taxi, coming right up." The return flight was quieter, the urgency of the previous day replaced by the peaceful glow of morning. James watched the landscape pass below, processing everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, he'd been a hospital employee with a predictable routine. Now, he was unemployed but with 2 job offers that might actually provide a better life for him and Emma. Sometimes, he reflected, the worst day of your life can open doors you never knew existed. The helicopter landed in a park near Mrs. Patel's apartment building. As James thanked the pilot and climbed out, he was surprised to see Emma running across the grass, Mrs. Patel following more slowly behind. Daddy. Emma launched herself into his arms, and James held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Hey, sweetheart. How did you know I was coming? It was on the news. Emma exclaimed. Mrs. Patel woke me up to watch. They said you saved everyone. James looked questioningly at Mrs. Patel, who smiled and shrugged. The helicopter landing was on the traffic report yesterday. Then this morning, they had a story about the chemical plant accident and mentioned a Dr. Mitchell who had been recruited right off the highway. He took a chance that it was you. They said you're a hero, Daddy, Emma said, her face glowing with pride. James knelt down to her level. I just helped out, Em. There were lots of heroes there last night. But you're my hero, she said simply, and James felt his throat tighten with emotion. Listen, Emma, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, before all this happened, I lost my job at the hospital. Emma's eyes widened. Is that why you were walking? Yes. My car broke down too. It wasn't a great day. Are we going to be okay? She asked, suddenly serious in the way children can be when they sense adult concerns. James looked at his daughter, this resilient, wonderful child who had already weathered the loss of her mother with more strength than many adults would have shown. He thought of the job offers, of the possibilities that had unexpectedly opened up. Yes, Emma, we're going to be more than okay. Sometimes life takes away something important to make room for something even better. Like when we had to give away my baby toys to make room for my big girl bed. James laughed. Exactly like that. As they walked hand in hand toward home, James realized that the termination letter was still crumpled in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at it for a moment, then let the breeze take it to a nearby trash can. Daddy, Emma said thoughtfully, if you get a new job, can it be one where helicopters pick you up every day? That would be so cool. James laughed and squeezed her hand. I'll see what I can do, sweetheart. You see what I can do. 6 months later, Dr. James Mitchell sat in his new office at Eastern Chemical Corporation, reviewing safety protocols for the rebuilt plant. His window overlooked a small corporate park where, twice a week, he taught a first aid class for employees and their families. Emma often joined these sessions, proudly handing out bandages and sharing what she called doctor wisdom with the participants. The corporate medical director position had turned out to be perfect. James supervised the company's 7 clinics, implemented new health and safety measures inspired by the accident, and still treated patients 3 days a week. His schedule was predictable, his salary more than adequate.